This is New Rural Virginia, reclaiming rural leadership through conversation featuring real voices, real issues from the heart of the Commonwealth. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of New Rural Virginia Podcast. I'm Parson Brown.
And I'm Larry Wohlers, and we are your podcast hosts. So, Parson, we are recording this on Thursday, the 29th of January, which is day 5 of the snow and ice. I'm not sure what we call this, Armageddon, or that hit us in Piedmont, Virginia.
It was just a squall, right? It's important to make sure that we reflect the date that we're recording because there's a lot going on in real time in politics in the Commonwealth right now, right, Larry?
Absolutely. We have a lot to follow, and we'll see what happens with issues like what our districts look like. I'm currently in the 10th.
Right now, I'm still in the 6th, but we don't know.
But wherever those districts end up, we are really privileged today to have with us a Virginian who has a resume so long that we can't possibly even reflect it in this discussion or we'll run out of time. And someone I've had the privilege to work with in the past, not in Virginia, but in Africa, strangely enough. Tom Perriello, who people will know here as the congressional representative for the 5th District during the first 2 years of the Obama administration, and got to cast a deciding and courageous vote for the Affordable Care Act. Then was in the State Department where I saw him ran for governor in 2017. And has now come back to the 5th District once again. So it's a pretty special moment. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to connect with you on whatever continent, but particularly here on our home turf. And I am currently in the 5th and will almost certainly remain in the 5th, but we will talk about that.
Well, my wife has said I'm not going back to Africa, so I guess we're going to have to do the work here. So tell us a little bit about your journey. I've mentioned just a bit of it, but what in particular has made you decide to come and run for office again in your home district?
Well, it's unfortunately because of pain, not because of joy at the moment. It's been difficult to see communities left behind, communities under attack. When we did the Affordable Care Act a few years ago, it was meant to be just the beginning. While I was proud to vote for the Affordable Care Act, I did push the President Obama and leaders that we should have a Medicare buy-in for 50 and above. We should have a public option. We should negotiate prescription drug rates. And rather than having that be the floor for getting universal affordable care to everyone, instead it's under attack from Congress. We see premiums going up, and this is particularly true for hardworking middle-class families and for small businesses. And of course, we've seen so many of our rural health clinics close. And, you and I have worked in countries with authoritarian leaders, and I know that when authoritarianism takes root, it can take generations to defeat it at its core. And I think we have an opportunity before this authoritarian surge in the United States takes deeper roots to stand up and push back and protect our communities. So I think whether it's the attack on the American dream or the attack on the American experiment, I think this is a time for leadership, and who holds power matters. And I think in particular, so many of our small towns and rural communities haven't had real federal champions for a long time. They've been left behind by the Republican Party, and they've generally been cut out of the Democratic map. I made a difference when I had the honor to serve back in, 08 to 10. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to not just win back this seat, but to really shift the agenda back to the priorities that matter to folks around this part of the state.
Thank you so much. And, so I didn't have the experiences that y'all had overseas, but I'm old enough to remember when you were a great voice for folks in Appalachian communities for a multitude of reasons and issues. So one thing that we like to ask folks is, what is it about your district that, it's really special to you? And what calls you back to represent the 5th District of the Commonwealth of Virginia?
One thing I love about the 5th District of Virginia is that it keeps you honest because it's really a cross section of so many different political viewpoints. And it reminds us that we're not actually divided red and blue. We're actually divided between 7, 8, 9 different viewpoints. But because there are only 2 teams to play for, everybody ends up having to go all in for their team. So, in the southern part of my district, the Republicans are as anti-NAFTA as the Democrats. And in the northern part of my district, the Democrats are just as pro-NAFTA as the Republicans. And I think we're seeing things similar right now in terms of attitudes towards artificial intelligence and tech oligarchs. I think we have an opportunity to have some conversations that haven't yet been pre-baked into, red and blue. So if you look at the current 5th, pretty similar to the one that elected me before, you have around Charlottesville, a very high growth kind of mid-Atlantic type blue area. You go through the Bible Belt of Liberty University and Lynchburg, and then you move into the 3 towns of Southside Virginia. The current district has added Powhatan, Guland, some areas that are sort of a mix of used to be rural, now more suburban. And so I love that the 5th District is a cross-section of so many communities that don't always have a voice. I also think it was an area where we could find common ground. I mean, in many ways, we're an early mover on what we now call green industrial policy. We wanted to bring back real green, clean energy-related manufacturing jobs and agricultural jobs. We were helping dairy farmers to do methane capture from manure to be a second crop, essentially, that was good for the environment and good for those farms. And often the enemy wasn't, Republicans or Democrats. It was Dominion Energy not wanting to allow them to sell that energy back to the grid because of the monopoly they have with both parties in the state. So, in a place like Central and Southside Virginia, yes, we do have our polarized feelings about Trump and certain issues, and people know where I stand on that. But it is also something that reminds me that our communities and our voters are just a lot more complex than the national media wants to cover it. And, I think that continues to be true today. So I think we have an opportunity to do those things at the same time. I think we can be fierce and unwavering in our resistance to attacks on our Constitution and our civil liberties and our freedoms, and also be having conversations about across a broader coalition about how the hell we're going to rebuild an American dream that hasn't been a reality for a generation or 2 now. And, when people can't buy their first home until their 40s and people are in debt. And, I think it's also, I know I'm giving a long answer here, but another thing I would just say about the district is, I don't know if you've heard this term, that artificial intelligence is like white collar NAFTA. But, it is going to threaten so many jobs across so many sectors. And when it happened mainly to blue collar working folks in Southside, really the coastal elites could ignore that and leave. Now it's coming for them. And I think it's a place where we can learn from the experiences of Southside of what didn't work, that we're going to probably need to be a lot bolder in what we're putting forward and can take some lessons from that. So it's a great area. It happens to be beautiful. So that's great too.
Yeah, thank you. And that wasn't so long of an answer because it's acknowledging the complexity of these communities that they deserve.
That's right. And that many of us from the outside or people from the outside don't really realize. And so that's why we asked that question. So thank you for that. And you mentioned the American dream. And that feeds into something that we here at New Rural Virginia have been focused on quite a bit, which is how do we rebuild or build prosperity in rural parts of Virginia? And the Republicans have been telling rural communities for 30 years that the solution is less government and lower taxes. And we see how that has not worked for people, right? And Democrats have tended to focus more on, well, what are the services we can give you, health care and SNAP, et cetera, which is useful. But what is the Democrat Democratic, or what could be the Democratic Party approach to really rebuilding prosperity in rural Virginia?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I think there are a few things we can look at. So one, I think, is across a broad swath of things, we need to move from very monopoly-oriented, centralized corporate power into more distributed economic development. And I think we can see that in the energy sector. Dominion Energy, as I mentioned, has tended to make more money by controlling the baseload power production. We know that every household, just like you can see share economy work in a city with, say, Uber, we can see multiple income streams for someone living in a rural community around either new scaled agriculture or around something like energy production. We also, I think, need to understand that one of the big lies the Republicans have said is that growth trickles down from the top, and it doesn't. It actually relates with the purchasing power of working folks. And one big piece of that is getting wages up. And I think when Democrats talk about affordability, we need to not just talk about bringing costs down, but we need to be getting paychecks up. I fought to get the minimum wage in Virginia up to $12 an hour. We were trying to get it to 15. And people who are making more on their wages overwhelmingly spend that money on local business. And I think we need to actually get back to that idea that paying people a decent wage and having them spend a little bit more of that in the community is part of how you try to build out some of these smaller towns. You try to rebuild Main Street. If the idea is just to open up a mega park and bring in one corporation, great. If you can bring in a big employer like the Hitachi plant that's going to expand in around Halifax or Mecklenburg, that's a good thing, but there aren't that many of those now. And so I think we need to actually look at how we can be expanding, helping these communities grow the ways they want to grow, not just by, importing folks from another place. So we've got to get wages up, and we've got to look at those clean energy jobs, those share economy jobs that can move out there. The other, and I think as long as we have this kind of monopolistic concentration, there's just a fair playing field anymore for small business, and that's where the job creation comes from. So now, look, there's some other very, very obvious things. We need to have affordable internet access in communities. We need it to be a place that people can raise a family. We have at least 3 counties in Southside Virginia that have lost their last OBGYN. Yeah, that comes when you're cutting off Medicaid reimbursements, when you're cutting off the premium tax credits. You're making it harder and harder to keep rural clinics open, keep specialists there, and then that's going to affect whether or not you're going to retain your talented young people when they want to start raising a family. So we do need to provide some of those issues of more affordable healthcare, more affordable internet, and create those conditions. But these communities are amazing, and we do see communities thriving across the Valley in Southwest Virginia. Right. I think it's important to tell that success story true. This isn't just a sob story. We've got some great communities and great growth. In fact, in some areas like Shenandoah Valley, we actually have so much growth that affordability is becoming more of the problem, housing affordability. That's a good problem to have to the extent that that suggests we see communities growing and coming back. And another key one is in a lot of towns, a university has been really central to keeping that middle class. Sure. And when we see those universities being attacked by the president and others, certainly here in Charlottesville, it's cost tens of millions of dollars. UVA isn't just a proud institution, it's the top employer in this area. So I think where we should be holding up trade schools, community colleges, 4-year universities also as a place that can help to retain, professional middle class.
So, like affordability, that is the word, right? That's the key word that's been going around, and we see ebbs and flows in affordability in some areas. But as you also talked about, the Trump administration says it wants to lower electricity prices. And as we talk about data centers and the way that we extract energy in Central and Southwestern Virginia, what is the true cost there? And as we talk about prosperity, I just wonder if you have any insights as to the difference between affordability and prosperity and sustainability.
Well, first of all, I think, as I said before, affordability shouldn't be a word. It should be an agenda. And that should look at both sides of what makes life affordable. That's costs coming down, but also paychecks going up. And I think we can focus on things that are going to make it easier for people to get a raise that they deserve. Now, healthcare comes on both sides of that, right? It's the biggest expense for a lot of families. And there are a lot of businesses who would love to give their employees a raise. And every year, that additional money is going to the premium hike instead of going to that pay increase. So we can look at both sides of the affordability agenda. I think we can also look at building out some of our industrial base. And here, I think people need to understand, and we need to do a better job of talking about it. People like Klein and McGuire stood there when Donald Trump took away hundreds of millions of dollars from the IRA climate bill that was pouring into rural communities. We said 40% of the funding in those bills that was going to be a 10 to 15-year build out for rural communities, hundreds of millions of dollars could be flowing into rural communities to rebuild a green industrial base. And Trump ripped those contracts out of the ground. And those jobs aren't blue jobs or red jobs. Those jobs are green jobs, both in the sense of being environmental and producing real paychecks. And that has been devastating for rural communities, along with the cuts to rural health clinics. So we actually had an agenda that was starting to move. We see the same thing with like the electrical vehicle market. And not only was that producing real manufacturing jobs in a lot of parts, at least near rural communities, we were starting to build the infrastructure for the charging stations and other things.
Right.
And we had gotten commitments from every Western country to refuse to allow the import of Chinese electric vehicles that they knew were going to flood in the market. Because of Trump's idiotic tariff policies and his saber rattling with all of our allies, every single one of those Western countries has now allowed Chinese EV imports. We can literally see jobs leaving the U.S. to go to China. Because we took a market where we were going to build an advantage for our workers in our communities, and John McGuire and Klein and others just sat there and did nothing while jobs left our communities and went to China. The same thing happened in 08 and 09 when we were building out the solar manufacturing industry under the stimulus. Those jobs were in the United States. They were manufacturing jobs in addition to installation jobs. And when the Tea Party came in 2011, they cut all of those investments, and China immediately went and built up its solar industry and then flooded back in the markets. So this is the second time in the last 15 years where Democrats were building jobs, good manufacturing jobs in these communities, only to have Republicans come in and send them to China. So at some point, I hope people will put their loyalty to the community and to the country ahead of whatever chaos they're trying to stir up. And I think our communities are paying a really big price for that.
Yes, absolutely. The Chinese have to be absolutely ecstatic, right? That we've handed them these new industries of the future with jobs that they're not only creating there, but they are exporting to every place in the world.
And one of the places that, the Democrats had drawn a line was that there would be no export of these top NVIDIA chips that are driving the artificial intelligence boom. China has done everything to want to get their hands on them. And Trump came in and basically lifted the exports. If you saw the story that NVIDIA was providing technical training that goes straight into the Chinese military on something that was one of our biggest comparative advantages. Same things with our universities that attract the best scientists everywhere in the world, best mathematicians everywhere in the world to come here. They end up starting companies, employing people, and Trump is literally handing that comparative advantage for our communities over Chinese, and John McGuire's doing nothing about it. Klein's doing nothing about it. This is cowardice. This is just a lack of putting our country first by a set of politicians that should know better.
Absolutely. Just circle back just one more time to healthcare, because say you were there present at the creation of the Affordable Care Act, and it became quickly very unpopular at the time in rural Virginia, but now saying, wait a minute, we actually need this, and we actually need Medicaid. But that said, looking at this long-term we do have a problem with affordability of healthcare, not just for the individual, but for the country. We spend far more as a country on healthcare than any other developed country and get less for it. What should Democrats be thinking about long term in healthcare reform?
Yeah, well, I want to talk about healthcare reform because we definitely need to get to universal healthcare. But I just want to say a thing about something Democrats, I think, need to do a better job of, particularly in some of our smaller towns and rural communities, which is, we've got to show up more than once and show up over time. And I say that because the Affordable Care Act vote I made 15 years ago or whenever was, controversial at the time, and it has aged well. And that means when I show up in communities now, I have credibility that I was willing to stand up to these corporate lobbyists in DC.
That's right.
Willing to do right by the community. And when people have seen you do that and deliver on something like that, then I think we have more credibility to have the next part of the conversation. If you look in a place like Danville, with the stimulus funds and the help of Governor Kane, we got $27 million to modernize the Robertson Bridge. And that's not a sexy thing to do, but when I talked to the community, they were very clear that that was the number one priority for them in terms of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Today, that bridge carries 7,000 or 8,000 people from North Carolina every day into a casino in Danville that they were able to get because the Robertson Bridge was there. And again, that means I can show up in Southside Virginia and talk about the fact that economic development and jobs is my priority. And I'm going to start by listening to the people on the front lines. It wasn't like I woke up in Charlottesville saying, I really want to modernize the Robertson Bridge, right? That's about showing up with the people who do that work day in and day out. So right now, I think one of the things we have to emphasize is not just what our policies are, but what are our priorities? And our priority in 0809 was very clear. We were going to prevent a depression, and we were going to get as much support as possible to hard-hit communities and hard-hit families. I have continued to prioritize that with getting up the minimum wage, getting healthcare costs down. This is something I find a lot of my friends who still support Trump or Trump curious can't answer. Just 2 weeks ago, he said that he wanted to cap interest rates on credit cards, right? So they were all like, see, he's standing up for everyday folks. And I offered them a bet. I said, all right, I'll bet you $100 that he spends less than 10 minutes on this over the next 2 weeks, while he spends several hours talking about Greenland. And not a single one of my Trump friends would take that bet because they all knew he'd tweet about it. But what are his priorities? And if you look at what he's actually spending the time on, it's the crypto kickbacks for his kids, and things that enrich him personally and things that create chaos, in our cities. And so don't show me your policies, show me your priorities. I think, where Democrats have shown up and focused on economic development and pathways into the middle class, that makes a difference. That's why we saw some Democrats like Lily Franklin and others able to win areas that hadn't had Democrats for a while. And I think that's why, we are in such a strong position to try to win the district as it is and to be able to run in, whatever district ends up being there.
Yeah.
On another note, rural Virginians like to, think of themselves as for law and order. A lot of people beyond rural Virginia, of course, are shocked by the videos and reportings from shootings and violence that's going on in Minneapolis. You've spent time in other countries where the police and military treat their own citizens as the enemy. Should rural Virginians worry about where this is going?
They are worried. I mean, I hear it from my Republican friends, Democratic friends, certainly my Libertarian friends. I don't think we hear enough of it, Run into many of the people who used to protest me with Gadsden flags when they thought that affordable health care was too much overreach for the federal government. And if you ask whether masked agents coming into cities without the city's permission and having no due process is something that, most folks in rural communities want, I have not found a whole lot of people who like that, white, black, or brown, rich or poor. And I think if you take that a step further and you have leaders like the wannabe rural Vance saying that he wants absolute immunity for these armed guards. I don't know a single person in the country who likes the idea of anyone with the power of government behind them to have absolute immunity. I mean, what would be, further from the concepts of our Constitution and certainly of conservatism in all of its forms. So I think people are appalled by this. I think, unfortunately, though, what you haven't seen is more than a couple Republicans in Congress who actually have the job of checking the executive branch, literally too scared to do their job. And whether that's McGuire or Klein or Griffin, like these are people who could step up. They could stop the tariffs. They could expand the healthcare premium tax credits, and they could check this clear and egregious abuse of federal power. And they're not doing it. The NRA even spoke up about some of this before any of the elected Republicans around here. And I think that speaks more to, cowardice than anything else. I called McGuire out on this. He put out a tweet that said, do you think that this group in Minnesota connected to the veterans nurse was a domestic terrorist operation ? And in politics, there's nothing more, better side of cowardice than the question mark, right? I'm not going to say that it's a domestic terrorism thing. I'm just going to ask the question of whether it's a domestic terrorist for a person who's an ICU nurse helping our veterans and, protecting a person who's being kicked. So, obviously that's the kind of thing that has a lot of rural folks really questioning where the Republican Party has gone. And I think we see that again with these districts that have been drawn before. I think those districts have been drawn in a way that have left rural communities behind. The entire western part of the state and southwestern part of the state has been put into 3 districts that are really not competitive at all, except the 5th in a very good year. And they're so large that it's very difficult to, be present in all of those places. So in the existing 5th district, you got the Lynchburg Republicans hate the Goochland Republicans, and the Southside Republicans feel like neither one of them ever sets foot in Southside and cares one whit about what goes on in, Pittsylvania County. So I don't think those communities have been well represented, even though many of the people living there may consider themselves conservative or Republican, and their member may be conservative Republican. That doesn't mean it's their kind of conservative and Republican. But it really has been shameful to see so few members of Congress willing to just do the bare minimum of their job, which is to show up and to be a co-equal branch to the executive on the issues the American people care about.
And as we said, we are recording on Thursday the 29th, and tomorrow there'll be a critical vote in the Senate in terms of that will show will some Republicans be willing to stand up for some very basic guardrails in terms of what Customs and Border Patrol is allowed to do. So by the time we publish this, we will know the answer to that question.
Right. And maybe revisit that GOP tribalism.
And let's be clear to your question about law and order. The other much more professional parts of our federal law enforcement have not been getting the resources that ICE has been getting. And there's a reason for that. They are actively shifting resources. And, I was struck when this was happening that I was down in Danville. It was Martin Luther King weekend. And Avon Keene, Pastor Keene, always does a march over the MLK Bridge in honor of Dr. King and in honor of the Blade March from 1963. And some of the elders were reminding me of something, actually teaching me something I didn't know about that march, which is that only a week before Bloody Monday happened, the local police had gone out and recruited people with no police training to come in, deputize them. And those were most of the people that administered the beatings on the bridge. So we have our own history here of what it means to actively go and recruit people without the professionalism and training of our law enforcement. And the group that I've been hearing more and more from is our sheriffs and our law enforcement officials who are furious about what Trump's doing because they've spent years building up good relationships in the community.
That's right.
trust in the community, getting the cooperation that is key to public safety. And they don't want to be painted with the same brush as a group of folks going in and not meeting anything like that professional or constitutional standard. So I think it's
and not caring.
Yeah.
Tom, here in New Rural Virginia, we have talked a lot about education and especially higher education in Virginia and the reduction in funding to higher education, the fact that the University of Virginia, less than 10% of the students are on Pell Grants, and the impact that the decline of that kind of funding has on rural communities. What should we be thinking about in terms of education?
Look, I think we are very blessed to have amazing public universities in Virginia, and it's very important for them to be supported and protected, and there are enormous positive effects, certainly Virginia Tech, in terms of its not just in Blacksburg, but its installations all over so many parts of Virginia. Same with the University of Virginia. The hospital, obviously, as a teaching hospital, has huge benefits for the broader Central Virginia community. But I also think we need to do some reimagining of higher education and of pathways to careers. And I think this has been happening. Parts of the community, my generation, I think we sort of overlearned a lesson that had come before, where a lot of the vocational and skills training had been getting kids tracked often by race or class in a way that was problematic. But the answer wasn't to get rid of the programs. It should have been to get rid of the tracking. And I think particularly with artificial intelligence, accelerating the extent to which some of the trade jobs are going to be safer than some of the professional jobs, I think we do be thinking about a more diverse set of ways to get people trained for the workforce, and where we can be getting that skills training in, starting at even the middle school and high school level, is crucial. So when I ran for governor, we ran on a platform of everyone in Virginia having up to 2 years debt-free training, career skills training, community college, or higher education. And Governor Northam went forward with a variation on that. So we have been expanding that. One of the things that I think is underappreciated in Virginia is the quality of our community colleges. They are, in most cases, extremely strong educational skills training institutions, much more affordable, by exponentially more affordable than most higher education. And people can then move into year 3 of a degree or get that certification and move into the workforce. And the thing I want to emphasize about this, and this was something we worked on in Congress, is that, one thing I think a lot of the Republican programs get wrong is telling everyone to, go back to work, you got to work. Great, except if you go to work at a $7.25 an hour job, you will lose money working.
Right.
Getting up to $12 an hour changes that. We have to make work pay more than the childcare costs, the transportation costs, and the other things people are doing. And I think the community college system is a great way for people who are being told to go take a minimum wage job, that they look at their paycheck and say, that's not going to work out for me, and say, okay, what gets you to $25 an hour? What gets you to a $30 job? And often those programs are there. And I think we want to be thinking about how to expand access and affordability to some of those programs that tend to move people specifically into, a living wage job.
Absolutely.
Well, I just want to thank you, Tom Perriello, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your insights, and we'll be following your campaign. There's a lot of uncertainty as to where the districts and those boundaries shall lie. It's always refreshing to have these conversations with folks who are continuously standing up for the Commonwealth. There is a song that has been written about you and thought that you might be able to tell us just a little bit about, that we're going to share.
Well, sure. I mean, it goes back to something and someone Larry knows well. So there's a guy named Brennan Gilmore from Lexington. And even though we grew up less than an hour apart, we met in Sierra Leone in West Africa when I was working on the peace process there. And he was in his first year as a Foreign Service officer. And when I ran for office, he's a bluegrass musician on the side. And he wrote the Perriello for the Common Good song for that first campaign that we were able to use. And he put together with some friends a group called the Perriello Pickers that would perform throughout the campaign. And they were able to come together. In fact, in the governor's race, he joined with another friend of mine from growing up to bring in a gospel component. So it was a bluegrass gospel hybrid. And they performed at our launch up at the brewery in Charlottesville just in December. So it's been a great opportunity to have a friend contribute in his own particular way and see how you can end up from, the Shenandoah Valley to West Africa and back again to Charlottesville.
It's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And that is what, if y'all stick around, you will be hearing as we close out.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Down these old roads of Virginia, he saw hard times falling on our land. Now he's getting it done up in Washington. We stand proud to have sent the right man. Perriello, for the common good. Perriello, for the change we need. From the hills of the Piedmont to the fields of Southside, Perriello, the choice for you and me. Fighting hard for us all, against all the odds, listening close in our cities and our towns. Our farmers, our troops, business large and small, no Tom will never let us down. Perriello, for the common good. Perriello, for the change we need. From the hills of the Piedmont to the fields of Southside, Perriello, the choice for you and me. He works all day long, taking double shifts, so moms and dads don't have to do the same. The wealth of our land is in the working man. We can reach as high as we aim. Perriello, for the common good. Perriello, for the change we need. From the hills of the Piedmont to the fields of Southside, Perriello, the choice for you and me. From the hills of the Piedmont to the fields of Southside, Perriello, the choice for you and me.
New Rural Virginia Podcast, Conversations about Rural Virginia's Future, is a product of New Rural Virginia. Visit newruralva.org for more. Please like, share, subscribe, and follow us. We're available anywhere you get your audio. For deeper dives into the topics we cover, catch additional insights and stories on the Rural Angles Substack newsletter. This program is produced by Larry Wohlers and yours truly, Parson Brown. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode.